Thank you all for joining us for a briefing on the uh, Google Play Store policies and the changes that have taken place recently. For today's discussion, we'll focus on how companies will be impacted by recent changes Google has made to its Play Store policy, but also give you all the background on what led us to this particular situation. Sarvesh and I will both do this presentation. I have gossip and political stuff to talk about, the politics of tech policy to talk about, and Sarvesh has more facts. Um, we'll talk about major concessions to Play Store policies, the reduction in commissions, the user choice billing program, and interestingly enough, a pilot program for real money gaming apps. And we'll examine, what are the main points for developers and how these changes might impact CCI investigations into the Play Store, and also how what Apple has been doing is impacting the Play Store as well. Can we just begin the presentation, Sarvesh? Okay. Could you move to the next slide? Right. So the fun part is that all of this began, in a sense, from an India perspective, when Paytm was banned in 2020 from the Google Play Store. And they didn't know why, they didn't know how, it seems. And essentially, what's the background behind why Paytm was banned from the Google Play Store, at least that's what we've heard, is that the gossip is that Dream11, which has a industry body called the Federation of Indian Fantasy Sports, approached Google about the fact that because they were apparently not being allowed to do something, why was Paytm being allowed to do it? Now, what were they doing? Paytm was allowing downloads and enabling downloads of Paytm First Games, which was a real money gaming app, which is not allowed on the Play Store. And it seems that previously, from what I've heard, again unconfirmed, Dream11 used to run a cricket scores app in which it used to enable downloads of the Dream11 app. Now, why was this happening? Because the Play Store doesn't allow direct downloads of real money gaming apps. These apps have nowhere else to go. So they were running ads on television, they were running ads online, and they were allowing direct downloads through an APK. And they were advertised, and they launched other apps like a cricket score app, for example, which was enabling directly through a click of a link the download of the APK for that for the real money gaming app. But I mean, Google's logic is what you can't do directly, how can you do that indirectly? So it started banning apps that were enabling APK downloads of real money gaming apps, which were indirect. Again, this is all hearsay, which is why Dream11, if it indeed went to Google to complain about Paytm First Game, that was perfectly legitimate because Paytm was promoting Paytm First Games within its own app. So it was this sort of a face-off regarding App Store policies that actually created the huge issue at that point in time. And Paytm, the moment it removed First Games from the Paytm app, it was allowed to come back on. And of course, there were controversies. This is largely the surrogate apps issue. And of course, there were issues that were raised about Paytm being a competitor to Google Pay, etc. But from what we understand, this is directly related to real money gaming. And that's why understanding real money gaming is just as important in understanding Play Store policies, because that triggered everything in India. Because just a couple of, I think maybe a week or two later, Google announced a so-called change, at least that's what we perceived it as, in its Play Store billing policies, after which, again, Paytm and a whole bunch of other founders start like push back against those changes. But we'll talk more about that later. I'll hand it over to Sarvesh from here.
Thanks, Nikhil. So just adding on to what Nikhil had said, so the tension that was happening in India was not isolated to India. Developers across the world had many concerns with how the app stores were functioning, and some of the key concerns, I think the biggest one is the commissions. So both the platforms charge anywhere between 10 to 30%, which developers feel is very high, because if they used alternative payment systems, they say that it's much less, a 1 to 2%. But on Google's argument is that we provide more than just the payment system, and the high commission is particularly a problem because apps aren't allowed to use alternative billing systems. They cannot have a Razorpay or Just Pay integration in the app and ask users to use that. So that's not allowed in either of the app stores. Added to this, there is restrictions on third-party app stores and side loading. So for when it comes to Apple, there's a complete ban on third-party app stores and side loading unless you jailbreak or something. With Google, what they say is they're open to it. You are allowed to download third-party app stores on Google, and you can install apps through the APK file. But Google doesn't exactly make it very easy for you, because they have multiple warnings pop up when you try to install an app by yourself outside of Play Store. And they also have a lot of tie-ups with manufacturers to have Play Store installed by default. So in a way, users are not going to go explore third-party app stores when there's already one on the device when it ships. Then another issue is self-preferencing, where the apps made by Google and Apple are shown higher up on results when you search. For example, if you search for a voice recorder app, you'll probably find Apple's own app show up even before any other app. So this again ties into the fact that some of these apps are already pre-installed, so there's less scope for competition for others. So Chrome comes pre-installed in a lot of Android devices. So how will Mozilla compete? How will Safari compete? And tied into this is something called Sherlocking, which is a term used to describe copycat apps. So this is when Apple or Google find that an app is performing extremely well, and they find that it would be nice of us to include it as part of the package, Android package or the iOS package. So let us just go ahead and do that. The problem with this is that there are existing apps which do the same function, which have been there for many years, and they are completely now, their business model does not exist because these iOS and Android devices come pre-installed with the same functionality.
Well, I'll give an example of that. I remember when Google first did its next billion, when it did the first Google for India event, where they had launched a unit called the Next Billion Users. They launched a whole bunch of utility apps, like, for example, File Manager, etc. Now, you've had a bunch of Chinese app developers that have basically enabled the same functionality. Google basically copied them. It's the same argument that we also hear in e-commerce against, Amazon and Flipkart allegedly, with Amazon particularly, right? Collecting data about which products are doing well and then releasing similar products under the Solemo brand or Amazon Basics brand. So that's one of the major issues, that one, you copycat. You have the data about what's doing well. In terms of self-preferencing, it's an allegation, but there is maybe no real tangible proof that really happens. But I remember a founder telling me that if you look at the editor's picks for the Google Play Store, month after month after month, Google apps were on it. So independence of preferential sort of, and what happens in apps is that the top 10 invariably remain the top 10 because they keep doing better, and one has to spend a lot of money to get into the top 10, and then sort of get into that or leverage those network effects that being ranked or editorially selected sort of create. So that is one of the so preferential treatment is another one. With side loading, I don't know how many of you've actually downloaded an APK. Funnily enough, I downloaded when I first bought Xiaomi phone from China way back in 2012. I downloaded a Play Store APK. But if you download an APK directly off the web on your device, the number of warnings that you get suggesting that you not use that app or not install that app, etc., etc. That's a legitimate security thing as well. But it also means that developers have nowhere else to go but to the Play Store, because that's where those warnings won't exist. Sorry, Sarvesh, back to you.
I think another big issue is how sometimes apps are removed abruptly from the Play Store. So most recently, I think like a couple of months back, we had India Gold's test EMI app. So Deepak, who's the founder of India Gold, had complained on Twitter that without any warning or violation notice, one of his company's apps were taken down, and his developer account was terminated. This just like completely disrupts a business, any business that relies on the Play Store. And in response to Deepak's tweet, there were at least like five to eight other companies from India who said that this has happened to them. These are all not small companies. They are like, some of them are well-known companies, and they said that this has happened to us as well, and we do not know what to do. We tried to appeal, but eventually Google took its own time, and we had our business disrupted. And Paytm's Vijay Shekhar Sharma also replied to that, saying that this is why the IT ministry has to do something, because Indian businesses are held hostage to Play Store and App Store. Tied into abrupt app removal, we have shadow banning, which is when...
Sorry, I'll just add a little bit more to that, right? Just to understand what has happened here, starting like back in 2011, 10, 11, 12, there was this entire debate about web versus app. And there was a push for web apps and HTML5 apps. None of that really worked. And what happened with the launch of the Android App Store and its popularity, and subsequently the Play Store, is that apps have become the primary means of accessing the internet. And so when you look at a country like India that has what, 790 to 800, sorry, it's about 892 million broadband connections or 880 million broadband connections, out of which 98% are wireless, out of which 98% are going to be Android. Basically, if you're running an app business in India, or if you're running a business in India that's on the internet, a large part of your business is going to be app-based. It's going to be, and it's going to be entirely dependent on the Google Play Store. And without that, without the Play Store, that business is most likely to collapse. It won't have scale. It won't have reach. It won't have regular usage. And so effectively for these developers, they have nowhere else to go. So it is a monopoly in that sense. So
I think that tied into all these is something called shadow banning, which is when Play Store kind of de-promotes the app on search results, but you don't even know about it unless someone finds someone does an analysis and finds out, okay, in some countries this app is showing up here, in some countries it's showing up here. Sometimes the app is not even shown on this. Like some developers found that the apps don't even show on Play Store, even it's listed on Play Store. So these are all, sometimes the decision making that goes behind these is unclear. And because it's kind of one-sided, the policies are take it or leave it, but developers cannot afford to leave it because there are not many alternatives to reach millions and millions of smartphone users. So they do take it, and then they're stuck with intransparent policies. They don't know what is the reason for rejection, for approval. Sometimes there are reasons, sometimes it's just a one-line statement saying this is where you went wrong, but find a way like to actually fix it. And finally, there are also complaints that there's delay in how these Play Stores pay developers. So a company might have to wait 1 month or sometimes longer if it's from other countries to get that payment out. And that's been pointed out by some of this is compared to like if you have an third-party billing system, you have a much faster timeline and when you get paid. Some of these payment providers pay daily, so that's one issue for developers. And all these issues have like culminated into multiple flashpoints with lawsuits in many countries, and in some countries investigations, and in some countries parliaments looking to regulate the app stores. And I think one of the key moments was when Epic Games filed a lawsuit against both Apple and Google. So what Epic Games basically did was they added their own payment methods. So this is how Epic Games screen used to look whenever a gamer wanted to go purchase some in-app in-app product. So they added their own Epic direct payment as an option, which is in direct violation of both Google Play Store and Apple's App Store's policies. And as soon as both these platforms found that Epic is doing this, they had immediately removed both. They both had removed Epic from the App Store and terminated the developer account. And Epic immediately took Apple to court, and then right after they took Google uh, to court. And the lawsuit was very interesting because over the course of the hearings, a lot of interesting details had come out in terms of how much Apple actually makes from Play Store. What they have a very high margin in Play Store, which is sometimes used to justify that they can cut down developer commissions and still be fine. And there were also uh, there was also updates on how Apple has some deals with Netflix, which allows Netflix to they have a much better revenue sharing deal with Netflix. So Netflix doesn't pay as much commission as other apps in effect. And there was discussions of how Google wanted to buy Epic, Google's deals with OEMs to have Play Store pre-installed. So with respect to these lawsuits, Apple's verdict has come out, and it has been largely in favor of Apple actually. On like I think out of 11 counts, 10 counts came in favor of Apple. The judge said that Apple has the right to charge whatever commission they seem fit, and they have the security reasons to ensure that third-party app stores are not allowed. And the one ground in which Apple lost is the judge had directed Apple to allow apps to link out to third-party apps, third-party payment systems. So that was, even though it's just one thing they lost on, that was a major count on which Apple lost. So Apple has appealed, and now the appeal is pending. With Google, the lawsuit has slight nuances, so it's a separate hearing. It's not like combined with this, and the hearing on that is yet to happen. Then in South Korea, and this is another big development because of the pressure from developers. South Korea in August 2021, it introduced an amendment to the Telecommunications Business Act. And as per this act, both Apple and Google must allow alternate payment systems, and it should, both Apple and Google cannot penalize developers for choosing to go this route. So they cannot like unusually delay the approval or delete the app without reason. And if they do delete the app for any reason, there has to be some kind of grievance mechanism for developers. And any kind of violation of this act could attract a fine of up to 3% of revenue. So this was this was the first regulation on a regulatory front. This was the first major regulation on app stores. And this prompted a lot of calls in India and other countries that we should also enact similar laws. And I think in India, before I go into like what's happening regulatory, in India, Nikhil briefly talked about what happened in September 2020, right after Paytm was kicked out of App Store and then Play Store and then reinstated. A week after, Google issued a clarification that all apps must use Google billing system. So until then, apps are using alternative billing systems fine. They did not have to, Google did not enforce it strictly. But in September, they said they're going to start enforcing this strictly. This is not a new policy for us. We've had this for a long time. We just want to make sure it's clear to developers that this is the way you can get users to pay only through our app stores. And I think
it kind of reminds me of, sorry, Service, it kind of reminds me of how there was this unsaid policy or assumed policy at Microsoft that they'll allow piracy of Windows in universities so that people get used to it. Until they started cracking down on piracy when at workplaces, etc. Right? So essentially, what's happening is in countries like India where this is not feasible, they allow it. And the moment a lawsuit happens, they realize that they're on a weak footing globally because in some countries, they don't enforce that particular billing approach. So, I mean, the way I look at it is Google was basically trying to make sure that it's approached in India, which is well known, public and visible, is not used against it in that lawsuit that fortnight filed. And it's kind of like that lawsuit forced them into action here. Pradesh, do you want to just go to the comments that some of the founders had made when I'd spoken with them?
Yeah.
So why this? This essentially started in a group called India Startup Group, which I think has about now 200 odd members, 250 odd members. I mean, as many as at that point in time. I think that uh, WhatsApp allowed, and it was just started by Vijay Shekhar Sharma, and it had some of the big founders who are not on WhatsApp groups otherwise, right? So, and all of them, it was just general chit chat for a while, and just a few days later, this policy came out, and Murugavel Janki Raman, who has been fighting Google um, specifically in terms of branded keywords and advertising, uh, he went to court earlier in the in 2011. I think you'll find those stories on MediaNama, and they were a part of the case, the CCI case that was launched against Google. Muruga, incidentally, who spoke at MediaNama's launch conference in 2008, and is an old friend. So I spoke with him about why sort of they want to do this, and his logic was that, look, if I make $100, $30 goes to I spend on advertising to acquire customers. Now, if you're going to say that 30 more bucks is going to be taken when they transact, what am I left with? I'm not viable. And so for them and for many other startups, this is an existential challenge, like, because Google and Facebook are so dominant in advertising, and Google's largely, from an AdWords perspective, AdWords is fairly dominant in the space, and the Play Store clearly has a monopoly when it comes to the App Store. They don't have a choice. I also spoke with Dinesh Agarwal, who's the founder of IndiaMart, and again, known him for many years. And Dinesh's logic was very, very simple. He said, look, what does a Play Store provide me? It provides me with security validation. It provides me with a payment gateway service. It provides me with a listing service for my app. It provides me with, what else was there? With enabling updates, right? He's saying that each of these is a separate service. If I look at payments there is no separation between what Google is charging for what. And so if there's a separation in this billing, then I can compare it with others. So if it's for payments, then why is it that I have to pay 30% to Google when a payment gateway is going to charge me 0.4, 0.5% per transaction? Because of the scale that I have, it doesn't make sense for me. So these are legitimate questions, because what Google, if you look at it, has also done broadly is used its ecosystem of services. When you look at Android, when you look at Google Ads, etc., to reinforce the dominance of the Play Store and prevent downloads outside, and not give people alternatives in terms of either payments or security verification. So as a package, they're controlling the ecosystem end to end, and therefore there is a lack of choice for developers. I mean, if you look at Dream11, they've built a massive user base outside of the Play Store, but the amount of money they've had to spend in order to be able to do that is substantial, and they only did it if they had a choice, they wouldn't be banned. They would have done it on the Play Store because it's more economical. So there is a value that the Play Store provides because of the scale that it has, but there isn't much that folks can do outside of that and still remain profitable. So I mean, these are just some of the issues that came up in my conversations. Sarvesh?
Yeah, and then eventually what happened was all these startup concerns then led to Meti calling for a meeting with the startup founders, asking them to present a list of concerns to see what the IT ministry can do about it. And then Google, succumbing to some kind of pressure, shifted the deadline. Initially, it was they gave them 1 year to abide by this billing policy, and then that deadline was shifted to March 31st of this year. And in March 31st, again, Google, by then, I think the pressure at the regulatory and the pressure on the world and even in India with investigations on both Play Store and on App Store pressure had only increased, and they had then shifted it again to the end of next month. And we don't know what's going to happen end of next month. If we get another extension, it should not be surprising. Eventually, also these complaints by the startups, they had approached CCI with those complaints, and CCI launched an investigation in 2020. CCI is basically looking at CCI said that there is concern that there's abuse of dominant position here, and it's specifically looking at the high commissions, exclusivity of choice of payment, pre-installing of Google Pay on many of the Android devices, and search manipulation and bias on Play Store for towards Google Pay. So if you look for a new Pay app, Google Pay is probably going to show up first. So that all these four areas are major parts of CCI's investigation. The investigation has been going on for almost 2 years now. Earlier this year in January, CCI had informed Karnataka High Court that it will complete by March, but then we did not get anything. In April, Bloomberg reported that the Director General's report says finds Google's practices unfair and discriminatory, but the copy was not shared, so we do not know what it contains exactly. And ET earlier this month had reported that CCI is in final stages of its investigation, and we can expect a decision anytime soon. On the Apple front, CCI is also investigating Apple, but this is based on a complaint filed by a nonprofit which was not known until this complaint was filed. So it's called Together We Fight Society, and it's a small startup, a small NGO. We had interviewed them to find out what are their concerns, why did they file this complaint. You can find those stories, but basically some of the interesting points that Together We Fight Society had made in its complaint, which eventually CCI agreed to a lot of those points and launched an investigation into Apple. Mainly it's the use of the in-app payment system, but also they pointed out how Apple is player and umpire with regards to how it can make decisions on with regards to self-preferencing, how it can make decisions on which app stays, which app doesn't stay, which app competes with its apps, which apps don't, and eventually how all this ties into higher prices for consumers in the end. Because I think that's a very good angle to approach it, because competition regulators always look at consumer welfare. And if someone's going to come and say that because they charge such a high commission, we are not able to charge a lower price for our in-app purchases. And then more recently, I think in last month, we had Match Group also file a complaint against Apple in India. This is separate from the earlier complaint, but it might be clubbed together by CCI. In this complaint, again, there were some interesting points. It shows how arbitrary some of Apple's and Google's policies are. So essentially, Uber, Ola doesn't have to pay that 30% commission because they are providing services on ground, a kind of physical service, not a digital service. So Tinder came and argued that we also provide matchmaking services, which is carried out in the real world. So why are we subject to 30% commission? Aren't we also providing the same matchmaking function that Uber is providing? And Match Group also pointed out that a lot of Indians prefer using payments like UPI, and UPI is like the most common payment in India, but Apple doesn't allow you to pay for an in-app purchase with UPI. So the government should do something about that. Just rounding up what I said so far. So we have investigations in India, we have a regulation in South Korea, and US we have multiple lawsuits. In US there's also a new bill which is very similar to the South Korea bill, but it also goes further and it requires a lot more concessions from Google and Apple. In UK we had the competitions authority there submitted its report in which it found that there is these Apple and Google have a very strong control over some of the most important digital gateways of our time, and there has to be an investigation carried out into this further. In European Union, we have a complaint that's being carried out based on Spotify's filing. In Netherlands, we actually have Apple already making some concessions based on a complaint filed by Match Group again. In Japan, there was an investigation which concluded, and actually that resulted in Apple allowing streaming apps like Netflix and Spotify to link out to third-party payment systems. So that was the result of the Japanese investigation. Earlier this month, Indonesia also launched an investigation, and this is just a short list. There are many other countries also looking into both these app stores. And I think that brings us to, so that's what led us to the various concessions that's happened over the last 2 years from Google and Apple. I'll be focusing on Google, but I'll add Apple's points wherever it's necessary.
I just wanted to add before you continue, Sarvesh, that
Yeah.
also remember that one of the things that the former DRA chairman used to talk about quite a bit was app neutrality. And that's something which Sebastian Soriano, who used to be the chairman of BEREC, which is the European telecom regulator, had also started talking about in 2018 or so. I'd met him then. And shortly thereafter, because he was also the chair of ARCEP, which is the French telecom regulator, they released a paper on neutrality of apps. And the same philosophy, I guess, as entities become more and more dominant, the neutrality of platforms is going to come up more and more.
So all this pressure that we had, which I briefly described about developers' concerns, the regulatory pressure, eventually led to the first major concession from Google was it made it easier for third-party app stores. It was always allowed, but there were a lot of warnings and steps. With Android 12, they said that we're going to make it easier. We're going to reduce the number of warnings we show. But again, it's not truly open yet because there are still warnings, and Google Play Store still comes pre-installed in many of the devices. So this is not a big concession. But what is a big concession was when Google and Apple reduced their commission from the standard 30%. So in March 2021, Google said that on the first 1 million that developers earn, we will only charge 15% commission. And they also pointed out that 99% of developers on Play Store earn less than 1 million. So essentially, most developers are going to just pay half the commission that they used to pay before. So this was the first major development in terms of commission. And Apple also had a similar policy, but with Apple, it's not on the first 1 million in revenue, it's on developers making less than 1 million. So essentially, with Google, the nuance is that even bigger developers only have to pay 15% commission on the first 1 million. Then another major concession was the commission was further reduced to 10% for certain categories of apps, specifically ebooks and music streaming services. So this was announced in October 2021. So this brought the lowest slab to 10%. These all change now with user choice billing, which I'll cover in a bit. And for subscriptions, earlier it used to be that on the first year of subscriptions, developers had to pay a 30% commission and subsequently 15%. In October 2021, Google said that even on the first year of subscription, you only have to pay 15%. So these are some major concessions made, but this was not enough. Since these concessions, there's still been a lot of investigations since then. And this month, we had Google announce that they are expanding user choice billing. So essentially what user choice billing is, it allows non-gaming apps to offer alternative billing systems, but it can only be offered alongside Google's in-app billing. So user has to get to choose if they want to use Google's billing or if they want to use the billing system of someone else like Razorpay or BillDesk, whichever partner that the developer ties up with. User billing choice actually started with Spotify in March of this year. But when Spotify was allowed to do this, there were a lot of concerns on what grounds is Spotify allowed, why is Spotify allowed, and why am I not allowed. So Google was accused of preferential treatment. So eventually, I think now they've expanded it from being like allowing one app or like a few apps to use pilot to a few countries to use. So now it's become a country-based model, and in Australia, India, Indonesia, Japan, and European Economic Area, all these are eligible for the user choice billing. But the key point here is there is still a commission that Google charges. It's not that if you use the third-party billing that you only have to pay the third-party billing's commission, which is around 1 to 2%. You still have to pay Google a commission. This commission is just reduced by 4%. So if you were earlier paying 30%, you pay 26. If you're earlier paying 15%, which most developers were, you now pay 11%, which can actually still be seen as high by most developers. And Google's stance here is we provide a lot more than just billing. So we are not going to budge on this aspect. We provide safety, we provide security, we provide discoverability, some of those aspects, whichever Nikhil talked about. So all those we provide. So that's why our commissions are there at where they are. But user choice billing also has like some requirements, like there has to be a customer support system for anyone using the third party payment. They have to comply with certain card and debit card and credit card regulations, and it can only be offered in the pilot country. So if you have an app which is offered around the world, this third party billing can only be offered in the countries where the pilot is there. Uh, Related to user choice billing is a development in EU, which is called alternative billing. The difference is in EU, developers can offer an alternative system without offering Google's billing alongside. Now, this is because the Digital Markets Act, which is not yet in effect, but when it goes into effect, it requires that Google offers such a choice. It cannot ask developers to offer both its own billing system and a third party. And for developers, this is a big deal because now users don't have a choice. Because if you had given users choice, there's a high chance that people might have chosen Google's billing. They are more familiar with Google's billing. It's more convenient. They know that Google will solve any issues that happens. They can ask for refunds if something is wrong, but they don't have that same kind of convenience or the same kind of comfort with the third-party billing system. So with user choice billing, that's a problem, which is not there in Europe. In South Korea also there is a similar thing, but it's not called user choice billing, but because of the regulations there, in effect, Google has to allow alternate billing. The key difference here in South Korea is that it applies for all apps, not just gaming apps. But otherwise, it's the same. The reduced 4% commission applies. And because of this reduced 4% commission still applying, South Korea has again launched an investigation into whether Apple and Google are actually complying with their new bill, or are they just like, getting away with still charging and going around it. Now, coming to just what the commission slabs are, if developers avail user choice billing, the three slabs with Google Play Store right now are 6% for ebooks and music streaming apps. That's the lowest. 11% for most developers earning less than 1 million, and for subscription services, and 26% for large developers. But the key point is Google and Apple both make most of the revenue from larger developers, like mostly game developers who earn well more than 1 million in revenue. So they still earn the 26% from them. Some questions that still remain with user choice billing is why only non-gaming apps are part of it. Because as I said, gaming apps are the major revenue drivers, but they are not part of this. And it cannot be security concerns because it's the same fact that applies to same security issues that apply to a normal app and a gaming app.
Actually,
But
Sarvesh, I would say that why only non-gaming apps are part of it, because Fortnite is a game, right? So you will not have a situation where there's a lawsuit filed against a company over revenue share, and while the lawsuit is going on, they will reduce it without any agreement in place. So why would they get rid of that leverage at that point in time, or why will they be shown as succumbing to pressure for gaming at that point in time? I don't expect that unless there's an out of court settlement, anything to move on the gaming front here.
yeah, so they said that gaming apps will eventually be part of it, but there's no timeline provided by Google on any of its public announcements. Another question with user choice billing is, will Apple follow suit? So Apple also has made a lot of concessions, but it's not gone so far as to allowing third-party payment systems yet. So they do allow third-party payment systems in South Korea because of regulation, and in Netherlands for dating apps because of, again, an investigation. But otherwise, Apple still is a little behind in this. One more question that hangs around is, what does it mean for investigations around the world? So if you look at what's happening with CCI, what's happening in Indonesia, what's happening in Europe. So the main aspect that all these regulators are looking into is whether uh, Google and Apple are restricting third-party payment options. But now Google and Apple can just come and say that, no, we're now allowing third-party payment options. So will this mean that regulators have to start again from ground up and now look at it from a different angle in terms of the commission is still high now, even though you're not allowing user choice billing? So how will it affect investigations is an open question. Moving on to another interesting concession that Google has made earlier this month. Real money gaming apps, specifically actually Rummy and Daily Fantasy Sports, not all real money gaming apps, are allowed to apply for a pilot program that's going to be for 1 year from end of this month to end of next year this month. So This is Google basically saying that we are trying to see if we can have a more broader open policy for real money gaming apps. So that's why we're doing this pilot. And it's a big deal because like Nikhil talked about at the start of this presentation of what happened with Paytm. So since then, since 2020, the real money gaming app market has grown substantially. There are over like one report has pointed out that there's like some 400 million users as of 2021, and we can expect it to reach 700 million users. This is not just real money, but gaming in general. 700 million users by 2025. But until now, all these real money gaming apps, the only way they could get on Android phones is if the user went and found the APK file and installed it, which is a major hindrance to the business. It's not, it's businesses are not able to like fully tap into the potential that they can if they were listed on Play Store. So that's why it's a big deal for many of the gaming companies. But there can be a lot of obstacles to what this Google's pilot, because just recently, I think yesterday or day before, Windsor had filed a lawsuit. Windsor is a gaming company in India which filed a lawsuit saying, why is Google only allowing Rummy and daily fantasy sports apps? Why is it not allowing all real money gaming apps? This is creating an unfair playing field, because this will only help a few, 3 or 4 platforms to flourish, while the rest of the industry is put at a disadvantage and having to rely on side loading. And a more important issue is a lot of state governments, specifically Karnataka, Tamil Nadu, are trying to ban Rummy and daily fantasy sports. They already tried to do it once, but courts overturned it. There are being like, we've done an in-depth story of how the lack of clear regulations with online gaming has led to like a chaotic piecemeal approach to different states doing different kinds of regulations. And eventually in many states we had like we get news reports of deaths related to people over borrowing to gamble. And because of this, we had Karnataka and Tamil Nadu pass legislation. So these states will now be more closely looking at Google Pilot, because it essentially makes it easier for gaming and gambling apps to come onto Play Store. But it's not a walk in the park. So for any company that wants to participate in this pilot, there's a long list of conditions that they have to abide by. Some of them is that they cannot use Google's in-app billing, which is very funny because otherwise Google wants everyone to use its in-app billing. But now they're saying we don't want any Rummy or Daily Fantasy Sport app to use our billing, because they will be associated with all the concerns that the money concerns that these gaming apps pose. So you have to use your own billing system if you want to come apply for this pilot. You cannot use an existing app that you already have. You have to make a new app which is just focused on DFS and Rummy. It can't just be any real money gaming app that's there. You have to like find out ways to restrict your app in states where it's banned. You have to make sure that you carry out age verification. You have to collect the address. You have to collect the PAN. You have to collect the bank account. You have to have effective redressal mechanisms for users who are having troubles or who are facing problems. You have to have requisite gaming licenses, and you must only target users in India. This is just some of the conditions. Compared to so this is what we spoke about so far is the pilot is in India, but Google's policies elsewhere is different. So when you look at countries like Australia, Belgium, UK, US, and some 10 to 11 countries listed here, in all these countries, Google's policies with regards to real money gaming is much more relaxed. So in these countries, you can actually have sports betting apps, you can have casino games, you can have horse racing if it's allowed in that country, you can have lotteries in addition to the daily fantasy sports that has been launched in India. So there's again for like players in this, the developers in this ecosystem, it's like, why is Google Play Store having a different policy for India when it's having these policies elsewhere? On Google's behalf, Google is like, we don't know what the regulations are in India, so that's why we don't know if we can have anything.
Well, they haven't really said that, but that's the way you look at it, right?
Yeah.
If you're running a Play Store and in that sense, geofencing is not that easy and not that common, or even if it is, it's not pervasive across different apps. You don't want to run foul of regulators and courts by allowing apps when there isn't regulatory clarity, and because there's no centralized policy on real money gaming, Google doesn't know what to do, which is why this shift that they made, where they decided to allow some, is an interesting one. I don't know if they got a go ahead from the government to be allowed to do it or not, but it's a concession in a sense. And it also is indicative of the fact that there is clarity in real money gaming policies that is expected. There's a cabinet note. I think that's being for the new policy that is being prepared, and um, we'll see what happens. We've heard rumors, which I don't want to get into, but you will have policies around real money gaming, and once there is regulatory clarity at a center level, then there will be probably regulatory clarity at a Google level as well.
Yeah, another very interesting aspect here is Apple App Store doesn't have the same restrictions on real money gaming apps. So Apple has a different policy, but I mean the same regulations apply to Apple. So why is Apple being more lenient? Because maybe because it doesn't have as many users in India. So that's something we don't know. We don't have clarity on why these two app stores have different policies on real money gaming. But then, yeah, that brings me to an end to the presentation. So we've done a lot of coverage on both Play Store and App Store. You can find all these in our archives. If you have any questions, I'm happy to take them. Nikhil and I can take them. These are some questions that are open for discussion. If anyone can answer these, it'll be helpful for all the others here as well.
Also, a lot of the stuff we've covered on MediaNama. I did a very detailed story in 2020 when the first Google issue, post the Paytm issue, when the first time when the commission sort of were enforced at 30%, and spoke to a bunch of founders. So there are stories that you can read on MediaNama that cover pretty much everything that we have talked about. So we have a question here. Play Store has apps like My 11 Circle that ask you to upgrade to Pro and send you a link over a text message. So download the Cash app. So Karan,